So, imagine you're sitting in a war room, right? Just looking at a massive map of the world.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And for like the last 70 years, if you wanted to understand global security, you really just looked for the solid, bright lines.
Right, the formal treaties.
Exactly. You looked at NATO. It was like engineering almost. A
Mm.
mutual defense pact gets signed, territorial lines are drawn, and diplomats can literally point to a specific article in a legally binding document and say, cross this line and we go to war.
It was very precise. I mean, it was binary. You were a treaty ally or, well, you were not. It was legally binding, highly visible, and just strictly categorized.
Yeah, but that whole 20th century model it's cracking.
It's completely cracking under the pressure of modern multipolarity.
And that actually brings us to the focus of our session today. When you step into the 21st century geopolitical architecture of the Indo-Pacific, that formal treaty framework is entirely broken.
The bright lines are gone.
Right, they're gone. We're looking at a strategic landscape now that relies on uh, overlapping agreements, working groups, and informal dialogues. It's like this massive web of influence rather than a solid wall of defense.
Which is frankly the definition of diplomatic muddy waters. But, those waters are exactly where the future of global trade, maritime security, tech supply chains, and really superpower hegemony are being decided right now.
Which is exactly why we're diving in. So welcome. If you're listening to this, you are preparing to master this material.
Absolutely.
This deep dive is a high-retention, exam-oriented audio lesson, and it's focused entirely on international relations. Specifically, we are mapping the geopolitical architecture of the Indo-Pacific.
And our primary sources today, just so we are clear, are official texts, strategic policy documents, and analytical notes covering 4 distinct pillars.
Right. We've got the quadrilateral grouping, which, is the QED, then the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the IPEF.
We'll also cover the partners in the Blue Pacific Initiative, or PBP.
Yeah, and finally, the broader allied strategic responses designed to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative.
So let's establish our methodology immediately. There will be no fluff in this analysis.
Not at all.
We are operating on a strict cause and effect strategic logic. For every single topic on our agenda, we're going to move sequentially. Start with the background and trigger events, analyze root causes and stakeholders.
And then we track the strategic motivations, the specific impact on India, and all those cascading economic, security, and geopolitical implications.
Precisely. Finally, we'll assess the institutional dimensions, India's balancing strategy, and future implications.
And because you need to not just hear this, but actually retain and deploy it on an exam, we're going to dynamically generate exam answer frameworks at the end of each major section.
We will be running active recall loops as well.
Yeah, think of us as your peers building the ultimate mental cheat sheet right along with you. So get ready. We are pivoting immediately to our first major section, the QAD and the broader concept of the Indo-Pacific.
Right. To understand the QED, we really have to first define the theater it operates within. I mean, what exactly is the Indo-Pacific?
That's the big question.
And we have to look at this through 2 distinct lenses, the geographic lens and the strategic lens.
So let's start with geography because, that's the literal map. Geographically, the Indo-Pacific is just this massive description connecting the Indian Ocean to the Western and Central Pacific Ocean.
Right. If you're a marine scientist trying to establish environmental baselines, that's your working definition.
But in international relations, in strategic discourse, that definition expands dramatically, right?
It does. Strategically, the Indo-Pacific denotes the wider maritime economic space. It stretches all the way from the eastern coast of Africa right across the ocean to the west coast of the United States.
Okay, wait, I want to pause on that because that is a staggering footprint. From East Africa to the U.S. West Coast.
It's massive.
We are talking about the geographic space where almost everything critical to the 21st century global economy plays out. I mean, this is where the busiest sea lanes are.
Where the most critical trade routes navigate through vital choke points.
Exactly. This is the absolute theater for strategic influence and fierce technology competition.
Precisely. And within that massive vital theater, we have the quadrilateral grouping. The QAD. We must define this with absolute legal and structural precision.
Let's do it.
The QAD consists of the United States, Japan, India, and Australia. It is an informal strategic dialogue. Let me repeat that because it's the most common point of failure in analysis. It is informal.
It's emphatically not a military alliance like NATO.
Exactly.
Right. There's no mutual defense treaty here. There's no Article 5. It says, an attack on one is an attack on all. There's no standing QID military force.
No. Instead, it's convened around a very specific, unifying policy theme. And that theme is the vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific.
Okay, so to understand how this informal dialogue even came to exist, we have to look at the trigger events. And there are two of them, right?
Yes. There's the diplomatic trigger, and then we have the root operational trigger. Let's actually start with the operational trigger, which dates way back to the year 2004.
Oh, right. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. I mean, it was an apocalyptic natural disaster. The sheer scale of the devastation across so many coastlines created a logistical nightmare that, frankly, no single country could handle alone. It required a massive, immediate, and coordinated humanitarian and disaster response.
Exactly. The navies of the United States, Japan, India, and Australia essentially had to figure out how to work together functionally, basically on the fly, to deliver aid.
Coordinate search and rescue, manage supply chains in a disaster zone.
Right. And that ad hoc disaster response cooperation planted the seed. It proved a critical concept, which is that these four major democratic navies could achieve operational interoperability in the maritime domain when a crisis demanded it.
So a catastrophic humanitarian crisis basically creates the operational blueprint, but it took a few years for that blueprint to become a stated policy.
It did. The diplomatic trigger occurred in 2007. Japan was actually the first to really articulate this geographic and strategic linkage as a cohesive policy frame.
And that 2007 articulation by Japan eventually morphed into what we now call the Free and Open Indo-Pacific, or FOIP.
OIP, exactly.
That acronym FOIP is heavily utilized by Japan and the U.S. to describe their strategic goals.
But an ad hoc tsunami response and a 2007 speech don't really explain the intense urgency and formalization we see today. For that, we have to examine the root causes driving the Quad right now.
Then what's the big one?
The undeniable root cause is great power competition.
Right. Specifically, the rise of China. We're looking at the intersection of the China-U.S. rivalry colliding with regional development, infrastructure needs, climate resilience, and, critically, maritime security.
China's rapid rise, its aggressive island building in contested waters, its expansive maritime claims, all of this has fundamentally altered the balance of power in the region.
And the Quway is a direct response to that shifting architecture. So let's break down the stakeholders and their objectives. We have the four democracies: India, the U.S., Australia, and Japan.
And their core objectives are explicitly laid out. First, obviously, to support that free, open, inclusive, and resilient Indo-Pacific.
But, they know that just releasing diplomatic statements about freedom of navigation doesn't actually help a small island nation dealing with illegal fishing.
It doesn't help at all.
So the objectives go heavily into practical outcomes. We're talking about health security, disaster response, and maritime domain awareness.
They're also aggressively targeting critical minerals and supply chain resilience, deepening digital and tech cooperation, and enhancing interoperability among the member states.
Now, notice the specific terminology used in their strategic motivations here, because how states define the concepts of inclusion versus containment completely shapes the reality of partnerships like the Quway.
That's a vital point. Yeah. China officially views the Quway as a containment strategy. They see it as an Asian NATO designed purely to encircle Beijing.
But the Quad members vehemently reject that label. They officially frame it as an inclusive strategy designed to protect rules-based institutions and freedom of navigation.
The reality is that strategically, the Quad absolutely acts as a deterrent. But equally importantly, it acts as a mechanism to provide regional powers, the smaller, non-aligned nations in Southeast Asia and the Pacific, with more and better options.
So the goal is to ensure these smaller nations don't have to just simply accept Chinese dominance out of, economic or security desperation.
Exactly. Which brings us to a massive question regarding the impact on India. Because if you look at India's historical foreign policy, it prided itself on non-alignment and strategic autonomy.
Right. For a long time, India relied on its neighborhood-first policy to manage its immediate region. So I have to ask, why join a U.S.-led grouping? Wasn't the neighborhood-first policy enough?
The definitive analytical answer is no. It was not enough. India had to tacitly accept a hard geopolitical reality. China's rise, its expanding footprint in the Indian Ocean, its Belt and Road investments in India's immediate neighbors, all of it meant that the neighborhood-first policy was simply insufficient.
I mean, you can't outspend Beijing in your own backyard using just bilateral outreach.
Precisely. India recognized that the presence of other global parties, like the US and Japan in the region, actually makes India's immediate neighbors feel more secure against Chinese coercion.
Wow, so that realization represents a major doctrinal shift.
It does. Consequently, India accepted the invitation to join the Quad, anchoring this membership within its broader Act East policy.
Let's lock that in. The Act East policy is the absolute cornerstone of India's engagement in the Indo-Pacific region.
Yes.
So now let's move to the economic and security implications by looking at the major initiatives launched under the Quad. Because, as we established, to be a valid alternative to China, the Quad has to deliver practical, tangible goods.
Let's trade off detailing these practical initiatives. I will start with health security, which was a massive test of the QAD's viability. In 2021, they announced the Quad Vaccine Partnership, or QVP.
And the QVP wasn't just about donating extra doses, right? It involved complex financing, technology transfer, and supply chain coordination to massively expand actual vaccine manufacturing capacity within the Indo-Pacific.
The goal was to build a resilient health infrastructure, not just for COVID, but for long-term pandemic preparedness, ensuring the region wasn't entirely dependent on Chinese vaccine diplomacy.
Right. Next is security, specifically the Maritime Domain Awareness Initiative, or MDA. This is arguably one of the most vital deliverables.
Let's explain how MDA actually works. It involves mechanisms and pilot projects to improve partner surveillance and the sharing of vessel tracking and maritime data across regional partners.
We're talking about integrating satellite feeds and commercial data here.
Exactly. And why does this matter? Because it allows countries to monitor dark shipping.
Oh, right. These are vessels that turn off their transponders to engage in illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing or, gray zone maritime militia activities.
Yes, by providing this data, the QAD directly enhances the sovereignty and resource protection of smaller nations.
Makes total sense. Then we have human capital development, the Quad Fellowship and higher education exchanges. These are targeted scholarships and researcher exchanges designed to build long-term technology links and human capital across the four nations.
It's about aligning the next generation of engineers and policymakers. Now, on the economic front, we see critical minerals and supply chain initiatives.
Right.
This is joint work to diversify and secure critical minerals, protect battery supply chains, and ensure industrial value addition.
And this is tightly coordinated through ministerial communiques, right? It aligns directly with broader G7 efforts to break China's near monopoly on rare earth processing.
Exactly. We also have climate and resilience projects. These focus on financing and technical cooperation for coastal resilience and blue economy pilots.
And don't forget, disaster response and humanitarian cooperation, which traces its operational DNA directly back to that 2004 tsunami we talked about.
And finally, digital, cyber, and emerging tech cooperation. This means establishing common principles for secure digital infrastructure like 5G and undersea cables and running AI governance pilots.
All right, so now let's pivot to the geopolitical and institutional dimensions because this is where we see the friction and the limitations of the QI.
Structurally, as we noted, it's informal. It operates entirely without a standing secretariat.
Right, there is no headquarters building in Tokyo or Washington. It operates via leaders' summits, ministerial meetings involving foreign, defense, health, and cyber ministers, and various working groups that run the actual projects like the MDA.
The emphasis is entirely on deliverables rather than building a rigid bureaucracy. But there are serious points of contention and challenges here.
Like what?
First is the perception problem we touched on earlier, the anti-China label. Because China aggressively portrays the QI as a containment bloc, that narrative complicates the QI's outreach.
Oh, because it makes it harder to get regional buy-in from smaller Asian countries who are terrified of being forced to choose sides in a new Cold War.
Exactly. Second, we have divergent interests among the members themselves. Australia, Japan, India, and the U.S. are all democracies, yes, but they have overlapping, not identical threat perceptions.
Right. Japan is highly focused on the East China Sea and Taiwan. India is deeply focused on its contested Himalayan border with China and the Indian Ocean, and Australia is looking at the South Pacific.
These different geographic priorities, combined with differing domestic politics, well, they slow down consensus on harder security measures and large unified financing packages.
I can see that.
Furthermore, from India's perspective, the heavy inclusion of global players like the U.S. in the immediate Indian Ocean neighborhood might actually increase multiple regional rivalries.
So that could potentially come at the cost of India's own independent leverage over its neighbors, which perfectly sets up India's specific response and balancing strategy.
Because India is walking a razor-thin geopolitical tightrope here.
Yeah. India is the only member of the QA coalition that is also part of another major security arrangement heavily influenced by China and Russia, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SKO.
This is India's supreme strategic dilemma, balancing its commitment to the U.S.-led, maritime-focused QED with its membership in the Eurasian continental, China-Russia-led SKO.
India's ability to maintain its strategic autonomy while navigating both groups is constantly being severely tested.
And this is not just a high-level diplomatic puzzle, right? It bleeds directly into domestic politics, trade, and economic security.
Exactly. To understand this, just look at the timeline of August to November 2025. During that window, our sources note significant India-U.S. tariff frictions. We saw intense sanctions pressure over India's ongoing procurement of Russian oil.
And this kind of transactional pressure and domestic political friction directly spills over into QED cooperation. When bilateral relations hit a rough patch over trade, it reduces the political bandwidth available in New Delhi and Washington for big, leader-level QED meetings.
Which brings us to a structural vulnerability, the operational asymmetry of the QUA. The reality is the U.S. often supplies the bulk of the leadership, the capital, and the technological resources.
Right, so if U.S. political will becomes uneven due to domestic elections, or if bilateral trade tensions arise, like those late 2025 tariff frictions, the risk of over-reliance becomes glaringly clear. Quaid projects can stall.
So looking at future implications, what does this actually mean for the diplomatic calendar? I mean, India was expected to host a Quad Leaders Summit around 2025 or 2026 based on the informal rotation plans.
But reporting since mid-2025 showed that scheduling became highly uncertain. Some reports pointed to early 2026, while others suggested 2026 was unlikely due to these exact political and trade tensions.
The prospects of India hosting the next Quad Summit hinge on four specific factors. If you are analyzing this geopolitically for an exam, you need to track these variables.
Let's list them. Number one, the state of India-U.S. bilateral relations by Q1 or Q2 of 2026.
Right. If the tariff disputes and sanctions pressure over Russian oil escalate, the U.S. administration might condition its willingness to attend.
However, if resilient diplomatic channels, evidenced by ongoing defense frameworks and technology transfers like the Tejas fighter jet engines, hold strong, they might keep the summit on track.
Okay, number two, domestic calendars. Elections and domestic political crises in any of the four member states severely constrain the timing for a leaders' summit.
Number three, regional crisis management. If an acute geopolitical shock occurs in the Western Pacific, say around Taiwan or the South China Sea, or in the Middle East, a massive in-person hosted summit in New Delhi might be scrapped.
And replaced by emergency virtual consultations, yeah. And factor number four, India's own strategic calculation.
India absolutely wants to host to signal its leadership in the global south and to anchor the QAD's development agenda.
But New Delhi must meticulously balance that desire against the domestic diplomatic costs of appearing to side too closely with the U.S., while active bilateral trade disputes are hurting Indian businesses.
The geopolitical consensus is that the prudent policy for India going forward is to pursue early diplomacy, focus heavily on tangible deliverables like the QVP and MDA over provocative great power signaling, and essentially prepare layered, flexible hosting options.
All right, let's put this all into practice. It is time for our exam answer framework generation. We are going to dynamically construct two structures based on everything we just covered regarding the QAD and the Indo-Pacific.
First, let's build the 150-word framework.
Okay. If you are asked to provide a tight 150-word short answer on the QAD, your structure must be incredibly disciplined.
Start by defining the QAD as an informal strategic dialogue between the U.S., Japan, India, and Australia, and explicitly state it is not a military alliance.
Next, state that it is anchored in the free and open Indo-Pacific, or FOIP, policy frame.
Then pivot immediately to its core objectives, acting as a strategic deterrent against China while delivering practical regional outcomes.
And you must list the specific deliverables to prove your knowledge. So cite maritime domain awareness, the MDA, and the Quad Vaccine Partnership, the QVP.
Finally, conclude by mentioning India's balancing act between its Act East policy and its SEO membership.
Perfect. Now let's scale that up. If you need a 250-word comprehensive structure, you need an intro body conclusion format.
Right. Heading 1. Introduction. You must distinguish between the geographic definition of the Indo-Pacific, connecting the Indian Ocean and Western Pacific, and the strategic definition, spanning from East Africa to the U.S. West Coast, focusing on trade and tech competition. Introduce the QA here.
Heading 2, Body. Break this into 3 distinct bullet points. Bullet 1, Objectives and Core Initiatives. List FOIP, MDA, QVP, and critical minerals.
Bullet 2, India's strategic posture. Contrast the historical Neighborhood First policy with the current Act East policy and explicitly detail the supreme strategic dilemma of balancing the Quad with China-Russia-led SKO.
Bullet 3, Challenges. Detail the operational asymmetries, the anti-China perception problem among ASEAN states, and how bilateral trade frictions like the August to November 2025 tariffs threaten summit momentum.
Heading 3, Conclusion. Argue that the prudent policy for the future is prioritizing tangible, practical deliverables and inclusive regional benefits over provocative, great power signaling.
And within those essays, here are the exact keywords you need to underline to signal mastery to an examiner. Write these down. FOIP, Act East policy, strategic deterrent, QVP, MDA, SCO balancing, and operational asymmetry.
Furthermore, utilize precise administrative terminology, refer to their technological systems as interoperability, their meeting structure as a ministerial architecture, and their communication is taking place via diplomatic channels.
Awesome. We are now moving into our rapid revision recap and active recall phase. I'm going to ask a series of direct questions based on what we just covered. Try to answer them in your head before the expert provides the correct data. Let's begin. Question 1. What specific year did Japan first articulate the Indo-Pacific policy frame, creating the diplomatic trigger?
The answer is 2007.
Question 2. Is the Quad a formal treaty alliance with a mutual defense clause like NATO?
No. It is strictly an informal strategic dialogue and ministerial architecture.
Question 3. What timeline saw significant India-U.S. tariff frictions and sanctions pressure over Russian oil that tested the momentum of the QAD?
August to November 2025.
Question 4. India faces a strategic dilemma by balancing the QA with membership in which Eurasian China-Russia-led organization?
The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SKO.
Excellence. Let's lock this first module in with a final revision capsule. We're connecting the 4 domains continuously to show the cause and effect chain.
Right. Geopolitics. The QA exists to counter China's rapid rise and provide regional deterrence without triggering the escalation of a formal treaty.
Economy. This geopolitical stance involves securing critical minerals, diversifying supply chains, and navigating bilateral trade tariffs.
Security. Security is achieved not through joint defense pacts, but through practical interoperability like maritime domain awareness and disaster response.
And domestic impact. This entire architecture forces a shift from India's neighborhood-first approach to the bolder Act East policy. Meanwhile, domestic political bandwidth dictates summit scheduling, as seen in the calculations for the potential 2026 summit.
That covers the QOA.
Take a breath, because we are immediately pivoting to main section 2, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPF. Let's lay out the background and the trigger event.
The IPEF was formally launched in May 2022 by U.S. President Joe Biden during his first Asia tour. This was the unveiling of the long-awaited U.S. Asia-Pacific Economic Strategy.
And to understand the trigger, you really have to place yourself in the global context of May 2022. I mean, the world was still reeling from supply chains that had been absolutely shattered by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Completely shattered.
We saw massive shortages in everything from life-saving medical supplies to the semiconductors needed to build cars.
Right, and the root cause necessitating this framework was the stark, terrifying realization of China's absolute centrality in those global supply chains.
Oh, yeah.
The pandemic exposed that the global economy was dangerously over-reliant on a single nation. The U.S. needed a strategic economic vehicle to counter that dominance, to build supply chain resilience outside of Beijing's orbit, and to do it quickly.
So who are the stakeholders? There are 14 founding member countries. You need to know these, so I am going to list them explicitly. We have the United States. We have the 4 QUAD members, Australia, India, and Japan. We have South Korea and New Zealand. We have Fiji.
And then we have 7 ASEAN countries: Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam.
Okay, so listing who is inside the framework is important for memorization.
But geopolitically, analyzing who was intentionally omitted is far more revealing. Let us look at those strategic omissions. Taiwan is the most glaring.
Right.
Taiwan produces the vast majority of the world's advanced semiconductors. They had indicated strong vocal interest in joining the IPEF.
And yet, Taiwan was deliberately left out. Why? Because bringing Taiwan into a formal U.S.-led economic bloc would cross a massive red line for Beijing.
The U.S. excluded Taiwan to appease other South and Southeast Asian nations who wanted to join the framework, but were terrified of antagonizing China and facing economic retaliation.
It's a delicate balancing act of managing regional diplomatic temperatures, so who else was left out?
Myanmar is not participating due to its internal political situation and military coup. Laos and Cambodia, two of the least developed countries in the ASEAN region, are absent given their very close economic, political, and infrastructure ties to China.
And notably, at the time of the launch, the broader Pacific Island nations were largely absent, save for Fiji.
Let's examine the strategic motivations and the institutional dimensions of IPF. And listener, this requires a major conceptual shift from how we usually think about trade.
Very true.
IPF is not a free trade agreement. Let me repeat that. It is not an FTA. There are zero market access guarantees and zero tariff reductions outlined in this framework.
Which naturally leads to a massive pushback. If there are no tariff cuts, why are these 14 countries at the table? I mean, if I'm India or Vietnam and the U.S. isn't lowering tariffs to let me sell more goods into the American market, what is the point of joining this U.S.-led framework?
Because it serves as a strategic middle ground. In the United States, domestic politics have made traditional free trade agreements incredibly unpopular.
Oh, because they're seen as offshoring American jobs.
Yes. The U.S. Congress is highly unlikely to pass a massive new FTA. So IPFF is a mechanism for the U.S. to regain control and standard-setting power over economic flows in the Indo-Pacific without having to get an FTA through Congress.
Interesting.
It is about setting the rules of the road for the 21st century digital and green economy before China establishes its own standards globally.
Think of it as a way to write the rule book for the future economy. To set those rules, IPEF is structured around 4 pillars. You must commit these to memory.
Pillar 1. Connected economy. This focuses on higher standards and rules for digital trade, including cross-border data flows. It covers fair trade topics across 7 subtopics: labor, environment and climate, digital economy, agriculture, transparency, competition policy, and trade facilitation.
Okay. Pillar 2, resilient economy. This is entirely about mapping and securing supply chains to withstand unexpected disruptions. It's the direct response to the pandemic shock, ensuring early warning systems for shortages in critical sectors like semiconductors and rare earths.
Pillar 3, clean economy. This targets green energy commitments, decarbonization, and renewable projects. It ties into security because reducing reliance on fossil fuels also reduces reliance on contested maritime choke points.
Pillar 4, fair economy. This pillar focuses on implementing fair trade by targeting corruption, preventing tax evasion, and enforcing effective taxation rules to ensure a level playing field.
Now, here is the crucial structural rule regarding these pillars. It is not an all-or-nothing treaty. Countries can choose to join any number of the 4 pillars. They could join 1, 2, 3, or all 4.
Let me use an analogy. It's like a prix-fixe menu at a restaurant. You don't have to order every course. But here is the catch. Once you choose a pillar, you are expected to commit to all aspects and rules within that specific pillar.
Yes, you cannot cherry-pick the subtopics within a pillar.
Right. If you order the connected economy main course, you have to eat the labor standards, the environmental standards, and the digital rules that come on that plate.
And this structural rule brings us directly to the impact on India, the economic implications, and the primary source of friction. Because India has a massive specific point of conflict within that first pillar, the connected economy.
And the issue is data localization. Let's break down what data localization actually means. In the modern digital economy, data is incredibly valuable. It's almost like a physical natural resource.
It really is.
India has been locking horns with the United States over this for the last 2 to 3 years. The core of the dispute centers around India's desire for digital sovereignty.
Let's look at the timeline. In 2019, the Indian government introduced a bill in the Lok Sabha that envisaged a strict framework for localizing Indian data. Essentially, it mandated that certain types of data generated by Indian citizens must be stored on physical servers located within the borders of India.
Right, and that same bill mandated the establishment of a powerful data protection authority to enforce these rules.
For massive American tech companies like Google, Meta, or Amazon, this is a nightmare. They operate on global fluid data flows.
Having to build physical data centers in India just for Indian data is massively expensive and fractures their global models. So the U.S. government's pushback on behalf of its tech sector was formal and severe.
Our source text points specifically to April 2022. The U.S. released its National Trade Estimate Report on foreign trade barriers. In that official government-issued report, the U.S. explicitly stated that India's proposed data localization requirements will serve as significant barriers to digital trade between the two countries.
The report stressed that this acts as a market access barrier, which is especially crippling for smaller American tech firms trying to operate in the massive Indian market.
So we see the geopolitical implications and India's balancing strategy playing out in real time here. IPEF has the potential to evolve from a mere rule-setting framework into a powerful economic alliance designed to counter the emergence of China.
But India is caught in a delicate balancing act. India desperately wants the benefits of Pillar 2 supply chain resilience because it wants to decouple its manufacturing from China and attract global companies moving out of Beijing.
Right.
But simultaneously, India fiercely resists the U.S. standard setting in Pillar 1 regarding cross-border data flows because it prioritizes its own domestic digital sovereignty.
That is a brilliant synthesis of the strategic dilemma. Let us turn that synthesis into our exam answer framework generation for IPEF. We'll start with the 150-word framework.
Let's do it. If you need to summarize IPEF in 150 words, start by defining IPEF as a U.S.-led economic strategy launched in May 2022 to counter China's supply chain dominance.
Then emphasize that it is an informal framework of 14 nations, not a free trade agreement, meaning no tariff reductions are offered.
Briefly list the 4 pillars: connected, resilient, clean, and fair economy.
And conclude by highlighting India's specific friction point. While India strongly supports supply chain resilience in Pillar 2, it opposes U.S. data flow rules in the connected economy, which is Pillar 1, due to its domestic legislative push for data localization.
Boom. And now for the 250-word comprehensive structure.
Heading 1, Introduction. Detail the launch context. May 2022, Biden's Asia tour, triggered directly by pandemic supply chain disruptions, revealing over-reliance on China.
Heading 2, Body. You need 3 distinct bullet points. Bullet 1, the structure. Detail the 14 members and explicitly list the 4 pillars. Mention the structural rule that nations can choose pillars but must adopt all rules within a chosen pillar without cherry-picking.
Bullet 2, the strategic omissions. Explain that Taiwan was excluded to avoid antagonizing China and escalating regional tensions, while Cambodia and Laos were excluded due to their deep infrastructural closeness to Beijing.
Bullet 3, India's policy friction. Dive deep into the data localization conflict. You must cite the 2019 Lok Sabha bill establishing the Data Protection Authority and the April 2022 U.S. National Trade Estimate Report, which explicitly labeled this policy a significant barrier to digital trade.
Heading 3, Conclusion. Assess the future implication. IPF serves as a middle ground for U.S. economic rule setting that may evolve into a broader economic alliance against China, requiring India to constantly balance its desire for digital sovereignty against its need for supply chain security.
And the key words to underline in your IPF answers are supply chain resilience, non-FTA, connected, resilient, clean, fair economy, data localization, and market access barriers. Ensure these terms are prominent in your text.
Let us lock this in with our rapid revision recap and active recall loop. I will ask the questions. Try to reason through the answer before the host provides it.
Question 1. Which 3 ASEAN nations were excluded from IPEF due to their close ties with China or internal political issues?
That would be Myanmar due to internal issues and Laos and Cambodia due to their heavy alignment with China. Question 2. What are the exact names of the 4 pillars of IPEF?
Connected, resilient, clean, and fair economy.
Question 3. What specific Indian domestic policy does the U.S. officially view as a significant barrier to digital trade?
Data localization, specifically regarding cross-border data flows as outlined in the 2019 Lok Sabha bill.
Excellent. Time for the final revision capsule for IPEF, connecting our 4 domains again. Geopolitics. The framework intentionally excludes Taiwan to manage regional diplomatic temperatures while simultaneously surrounding China's economic sphere with new standard-setting rules.
Economy. It is a non-FTA that offers no tariff reductions but seeks to standardize digital rules, labor standards, and build resilient supply chains.
Security. The underlying geopolitical goal is reducing absolute dependence on China for critical manufacturing, rare earths, and trade.
Domestic impact. U.S. framework rules directly clash with India's domestic legislative agenda, specifically the 2019 bill aimed at creating a data protection authority to ensure digital sovereignty.
That is exactly the kind of rigorous linkage required. Now we pivot to main section 3, partners in the Blue Pacific, or PBP, and the broader allied counter-China initiatives.
Yes, and to understand the PBP, we must first master the geography of the Pacific Island nations.
Geography is absolute destiny here. The Pacific Island nations are scattered across a vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. They are divided into three primary geographic groupings. You really need to map this in your mind.
Okay, let's map it.
First is Polynesia. This is a massive group of islands in the eastern Pacific, primarily enclosed by a huge geographic triangle. The Hawaiian Islands to the north, New Zealand to the southwest, and Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, to the east.
Got it. Second is Micronesia, located north of the equator and east of the Philippines.
And third is Melanesia, a large arc of islands lying north and east of Australia and south of the equator.
Now, governing this massive expanse politically and economically is the Pacific Islands Forum, or PIF. The PIF is the region's leading institutional body. It consists of 18 members.
Given our mandate for absolute factual completeness, we're going to list all 18 members to understand the full scope of this forum.
Okay, deep breath. The 18 members of the Pacific Islands Forum are Australia, Cook Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, Fiji, French Polynesia, Kiribati, Nauru, New Caledonia, New Zealand, Niue, Palau, Papua New Guinea, Republic of Marshall Islands, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Tonga, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu.
Thank you. Now let's examine the trigger event that brought the global geopolitical spotlight crashing down onto these idyllic islands. Because for a long time, the major powers somewhat neglected this region.
Yeah, they really did. But the geostrategic competition heated up dramatically due to an immediate shocking security trigger. China and the Solomon Islands signed a formal bilateral security agreement.
That agreement was a massive geopolitical shockwave. It raised severe, immediate concerns in Western capitals about the Chinese military establishing a forward operating naval base in the Southern Pacific.
And to understand the panic, just look at the map. A Chinese naval base in the Solomon Islands would put Chinese forces alarmingly near the U.S. island territory of Guam, which is, a critical U.S. military hub.
And it would also place Chinese naval assets dangerously close to the coastlines of Australia and New Zealand, effectively piercing the traditional defensive perimeter of the West and the Pacific.
Wow. And that primary security trigger was compounded by a secondary economic and diplomatic trigger, right?
It was. Shortly after, China attempted to push through a common development vision deal with 10 different Pacific states. This proposed multilateral agreement aimed to assist China in working on traditional and non-traditional security and massively expanding law enforcement and cybersecurity cooperation with these nations.
So it wasn't just a bilateral thing anymore.
Right. While that specific broad agreement could not be signed immediately due to pushback from some islands, China explicitly resolved to continue pursuing it.
So the West had to respond, and they couldn't just respond with military posturing. They needed to offer an alternative. The response was the Partners in the Blue Pacific, or PBP. The stakeholders here are a 5-nation coalition.
Importantly, just like the QOD, the PBP is classified as an informal mechanism. Its stated objective is to support Pacific Islands and radically boost diplomatic and economic ties.
The PBP aspires to improve collaboration across 4 specific areas. First, connectivity and transportation infrastructure. Second, dealing with the climate crisis, which is frankly an existential, literal threat to the survival of these low-lying islands due to rising sea levels.
Third, marine security and protection, combating illegal fishing. And fourth, prosperity, health, and education.
The overarching strategic motivation is clear. The U.S. and its allies intend to elevate Pacific regionalism, strengthen connections directly with the Pacific Islands Forum, and essentially direct massive amounts of capital and resources to offset China's aggressive, well-funded outreach.
This brings us to a crucial synthesis point. How does the PBP fit into the broader global strategy? Because the PBP is just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Right, there is a whole global chessboard of allied efforts trying to counter China's massive infrastructure project, the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI.
Let's synthesize the broader geopolitical and security implications by looking at 4 major global counter-initiatives.
Number 1, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, or PGII. This is a colossal plan announced by the G7 nations to raise $600 billion in public and private investment for poor countries.
It is a direct dollar-for-dollar response to counter China's BRI by offering alternative financing for roads, ports, and digital infrastructure without the risk of Chinese debt trap diplomacy.
Number 2, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, or IPE, which we just analyzed deeply. It's reiterated here as a core pillar of the U.S.-led economic standard-setting strategy.
Number 3, the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, or AGC. This is a crucial collaboration specifically between India and Japan.
Yeah, it focuses on development, connectivity, and capacity building cooperation spanning across Asia and into Africa, leveraging Japanese capital and Indian execution experience.
And number 4, the Global Gateway. This is a massive initiative launched by the European Union, aiming to narrow the global investment gap and provide a European alternative to Chinese financing across the global south.
So, looking at the impact on India and its balancing strategy, we see that India is deeply, inextricably woven into this network. I mean, India is a core member of the Quewa, India is a founding member of IPE.
And through the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor with Japan, India is actively expanding its strategic autonomy.
Exactly. India is leveraging these multiple partnerships to project influence far beyond its immediate borders. By doing so, it's tying its own economic growth and security to the broader U.S. and Allied-backed Indo-Pacific security architecture, while still officially maintaining its stance of non-alignment.
Let's crystallize this with our exam answer framework generation for the PBP and allied initiatives. First, the 150-word framework.
For the 150-word answer, begin by mapping the geostrategic heating of the Pacific region, dividing it into Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia under the umbrella of the 18-member Pacific Islands Forum.
State the immediate trigger: the China-Solomon Islands Security Pact and China's attempt to pass the Common Development Vision.
Explain that the U.S. and allies responded with the Partners in the Blue Pacific, or PBP, a five-nation informal mechanism focused on climate and marine security.
Conclude by linking the PBP to broader global infrastructure efforts like the G7's $600 billion PGII and the India-Japan AGC, all designed to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Perfect. Now for the comprehensive 250-word structure.
Heading 1. Introduction. Outline the geographical division of the Pacific Islands, Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia, and introduce the central governing role of the Pacific Islands Forum.
Heading 2. Body. Use 2 extended bullet points here. Bullet 1, the Chinese trigger. Detail the dual threats, the bilateral security agreement with the Solomon Islands raising severe fears of a forward naval base near Guam and Australia, and the multilateral attempt to pass the Common Development Vision focused on law enforcement cooperation.
Bullet 2. The Allied response. Contrast China's moves with the five-nation PBP informal mechanism targeting climate resilience and marine security. Then expand outward to the global initiatives.
Right. Define the G7's $600 billion PGII, the EU's Global Gateway, and the India-Japan-Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, the AGC.
Heading 3. Conclusion. Summarize the macro trend. The global shift from purely military alliances toward massive coordinated infrastructure and economic investment is the primary tool to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative in the Indo-Pacific.
The key words to strictly underline in this section to demonstrate comprehensive understanding are Pacific Islands Forum, Solomon Islands Security Agreement, Informal Mechanism, PGII, AGC, and Belt and Road Initiative. Make sure you use these exact phrases.
Let's move to the rapid revision recap and active recall for this final module. Test your retention. Question 1. Name the 3 primary geographic groupings of the Pacific Islands.
Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia.
Question 2. What was the G7's specific financial response to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative?
The Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, or PGII, backed by a target of $600 billion.
Question 3. What specific initiative links India and Japan for infrastructure development and connectivity across the Global South in this context?
The Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, or AGC.
Time for the final revision capsule for the Pacific module, connecting the domains one last time. Geopolitics. The acute fear of a Chinese military base in the Solomon Islands triggers an immediate, panicked Western diplomatic surge into the Pacific.
Economy. This geopolitical fear manifests in massive capital deployment via the PGII and the Global Gateway to rival and outbid Chinese infrastructure loans.
Security. The PBP framework focuses heavily on marine protection, climate resilience, and traditional and non-traditional security cooperation to secure the island chains.
Domestic impact. This entire global shift elevates India's global footprint through the AGC, linking India's domestic capacity building with deep Japanese capital to project power into Africa.
That is an incredibly dense factual mapping of the region. As we move into our outro, we need a mega linkage.
Yeah, we've covered the QUAD, the IPF, and the PP. How do these 3 massive modules connect at the highest strategic level? Like, what is the grand theory here?
The mega linkage is the rapid evolution of international relations itself. Notice the unmistakable pattern across all 3 modules we just dissected. We are witnessing the death of the rigid formal treaty.
Right. Nobody's assigning new NATOs.
Exactly. Informal mechanisms, flexible policy frameworks, and targeted working groups are entirely replacing formal alliances in managing 21st century multipolarity.
So whether it's the QA delivering vaccines and tracking dark shipping, IPF mapping semiconductor supply chains and setting data rules, or the PBP managing climate threats and infrastructure in the Pacific,
The new global architecture relies on complex trade security linkages rather than mutual defense clauses. It is flexible, but it is fragile.
which leaves us with a final provocative thought to mull over. If traditional formal alliances like NATO are deemed too rigid for the modern Indo-Pacific, and these new informal mechanisms rely entirely on aligned domestic politics, shared vision, and constant diplomatic maintenance.
What happens to the entire Indo-Pacific security architecture if domestic political will in just one major power falters?
That is the ultimate vulnerability, right? If trade frictions, like the 2025 tariffs we discussed, permanently derail the political bandwidth of just one Quad or IPF member, does the entire informal network collapse?
If there's no treaty binding them together, what stops the whole architecture from just evaporating when a new administration takes office?
They require constant, active, exhausting maintenance.
Yes. Without a treaty, there is no autopilot.
Think about that as you review your notes. You now have a complete, high-retention strategic briefing on the geopolitical architecture of the Indo-Pacific. Review those answer frameworks, practice the active recall loops, and master the cause and effect linkages from geopolitics to domestic impact. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay focused, and we will see you next time.